Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the center and online today for this event. And welcome to the first center seminar for this academic year. And my name is Lu Chen. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Wellcome Center for Cultures and Environments of Health. So we are very delighted to have Dr. Haley Peckham and Danny and Mike from Leds of Us today to have a conversation about trauma, justice, and the human condition. So firstly, I will give a brief introduction to Haley and Danny before their presentation. Then each of the speaker will give a presentation for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then there will be a Q&A afterwards. And I will keep an eye on those who join us online. And if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and ask the questions by yourself, or you can write down your question in the chat box. I can read the questions for you as well. Just a reminder that this seminar has been recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So if you ask any questions or participated in the conversation, that part will also be recorded. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce you our first speaker today, Dr. Haley Peckham. Dr. Peckham, she studied the molecular neuroscience at Bristol University and got her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Melbourne. Her research brings an extensive background in philosophy, mental health, psychotherapy, and neuroscience grounded in her own lived experience of recovering from complex trauma. Haley has offered trainings in neuroplasticity and attachment for adverse childhood experience, aware and trauma-informed approaches to professionals in mental health, forensic, and correction service in Victoria, Australia, both independently and through the Centre of Mental Health Nursing at the University of Melbourne. Since her return to the UK, she has continued to deliver training alongside her mental health nursing, where she learns from and works with people in crisis. As a lifelong learner, Haley is committed to her own personal and professional development while helping to shape surveys that support children and adults with trauma. So Dr. Peckham, you have the floor.
What I'd like to talk about today is really what evolutionary perspectives bring to sort of trauma-informed approaches, this idea of things, how to approach things in a compassionate way, but also to sort of address some issues of responsibility that come up too. So I'll take about 30 minutes and look forward to questions at the end. So I usually talk about neuroplasticity, and you can see that I've started with sort of a plasticine brain here, which is a great image because our brains are very plastic, and they're more plastic in childhood than at any other time. And the way that I like to think about experiences is that they are a little like rain. So no particular raindrop makes a huge amount of impact on the brain, if you like, but collectively many raindrops and rain altogether, as it falls, it makes a sort of lands, and the same with experiences on the brain. Collectively, these experiences sort of fall on the brain, and as they do, just like water, it sort of creates channels that the water travels down. And the same with experiences, really. They sort of form these pathways, these neural pathways, and the experiences sort of hone out these neural pathways. And when they're repeated over and over with more experiences or more water, if you like, then that creates these channels. And what that then means is that experiences are likely to go down those same established pathways. And eventually, as we know, water shapes the whole of the landscape. And it's the same with experiences in the brain, really. The brain is profoundly shaped, if not really built, by experiences. So I'm not going to go into huge detail about these mechanisms, but I do want to say that there are 4 mechanisms here that I often talk about, and sort of moving on the images sort of as you would read. The first one is sort of DNA, and that's sort of to symbolize epigenetics, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then to the right of that, neurogenesis. It's new neurons being created. And then below, the sort of spidery diagram, that's to symbolize synaptic plasticity. And then to the right, the beautifully colored diagram, which is the coloring of myelin in the brain. Oh my goodness, my battery is going to run out now. this presenting far from home. Okay. So the one at the bottom is myelin, the different sort of visual image of myelination in the brain. So just to introduce epigenetics for those of you that may not have heard of it, epi literally means above. So epigenetic means above the gene. And what they are is they're sort of tiny chemical groups, or some of them at least, are tiny chemical groups that attach to the DNA or to the histones, which is what the DNA kind of wraps around. And what this does is it sort of makes genes more or less accessible. So I've written to transcription machinery, but basically genes are like a recipe for proteins, and the proteins are what sort of do everything in our body. So if we make those genes more accessible, then we're likely to have more of that protein produced. It's sort of, in a sense, as basic as that, even though the whole thing is very elegant and intricate. But what this sort of means is that it's experiences in the world that can shape whether or not epigenetic marks are added or taken away. And so what that means is changes in gene expression occur following particular sorts of experiences. And they can persist from minutes to a lifetime, or they can even be transgenerational. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So one of the things, one of the sort of landmark studies in this field was by Michael Meany's team, and it was into the glucocorticoid receptor. Now, lots of people haven't heard of the glucocorticoid receptor, but it's the receptor for cortisol or corticosterone if you're talking about rodents. And that's the stress hormone, which many people have heard about. And what they discovered in this study was that the glucocorticoid receptor is epigenetically regulated by maternal care. And what that really meant is the rats, the little rat pups that had lots of licking and grooming, which counts as lots of early maternal care, had the epigenetic, they had a permissive epigenetic mark on their glucocorticoid receptor. So they had lots and lots of glucocorticoid receptors. And that's really good, because then when you've got the corticosterone circulating around the body in times of stress, it means that the effect is very swift because there's lots of receptors for it to work through. And also the negative feedback works really efficiently. So the stress response can then be shut down very efficiently. The rat pups who had less licking and grooming, perhaps their mother was less available to them in some ways, and they sometimes deprive them of nursing bedding. So the mother rats can be quite occupied with trying to make the nest. And so then because of that are less available, if you like, to their rat pups. What that means is less licking and grooming. They don't get the permissive mark on the glucocorticoid receptor. So there's fewer glucocorticoid receptors, which means the stress response continues for a longer period because it takes longer to shut it down. Now, that's not necessarily bad. It might not, if you like, feel good. But it's not necessarily bad, because if mother is a little less available, then it's quite helpful perhaps for those pups to be stressed, not because stress is a good thing, but in some aspects it can be a good thing if it heightens us to what's going on in the environment, if it helps learning, if it keeps us alert or keeps us awake. So there are some sort of positives about it. But essentially what's happened here is there is an adaptive change to the calibration of the stress response system according to this early maternal care. So that's one of the ways that epigenetics can be adaptive. So moving on to neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is about the growth of new neurons and how they integrate into the existing network. And we think it's to do, it supports new memory formation and also subtle changes to existing memories. Whenever we tell the story of a memory, it's held slightly differently in the brain. So here we've got a picture of it's a black-capped chickadee, and they are birds, they are food hoarding birds. And one of the things we know about food hoarding birds is they have higher levels of neurogenesis in the autumn. And what we can sort of hypothesize about that is that is to do with their memory needing to be better in the autumn, because that's when they're hiding their food, which is incredibly important if you are reliant on it. And in further support of that, if you look at the level or rate of neurogenesis in birds that are kept in captivity, where they are not reliant on finding stored food because it's given to them, they still have a higher rate of neurogenesis in autumn. But if you compare them with birds in the wild, the birds in the wild will have a higher rate of neurogenesis. They are more reliant on those memories. And birds who are in a harsh environment where food is scarce, they have a higher rate still of neurogenesis, because those birds, or presumably because those birds find it already hard to find food, so it's imperative that they remember where they have hidden it, which is what allows them to survive the winter. So again, the possibility here, what it looks like, is that the change is adaptive, that the brain has adapted, or we've got these mechanisms that adapt to the experiences in the world. So synaptic plasticity is, and you'll all recognize this, I'm sure, neurons that fire together, wire together. Now, I don't know if you can see me, I'm probably a tiny postage stamp, but if this neuron fires and it's strong enough to depolarize this neuron, then that junction between them is favored, it gets stronger. So that's how synapses are built and sort of rehearsed. And the opposite is also true. If this neuron fires, but it's not strong enough to make this neuron fire, then that neural pathway is weakened. So that's how pathways are strengthened and weakened. So with this, it's a Californian sea slug, and Eric Kandel's group got a Nobel Prize for the work they did with the Californian sea slug. And what they did was they manipulated its withdrawal reflex. So if you touch its tail, it withdraws its gill. And you can either sensitize that reflex or you can habituate that reflex. Now, if you habituate it, you might very gently touch the tail and repeatedly, very gently touch the tail, repeatedly, gently touch the tail. And what the sea slug then does is it withdraws its gill quite slowly. On the other hand, if you apply a small electric shock to its tail, it withdraws the gill much faster, and that's sensitization. So what they did, this study group, was they put this sea slug through these different protocols, and then they looked at its actual nervous system, which they said is quite simple. It's only 20,000 neurons, which still sounds quite complicated. But they traced the impact of experience down to particular synapses that were either strengthened or weakened, representing the learning that had been done according to experience in the world. So here, synaptic plasticity, lots of brain activity, is about learning about, adapting to what has happened in the world. And moving on to the last level of neuroplasticity that I wanted to speak about is white matter plasticity. Now, basically that's about myelination. So myelin, if you like, is, so I'm holding up, I don't know if you can see, I'm holding up a cable. And so we know that in the cable there is this copper wire, and that's the sort of business, that's where the business happens. That transfers the electricity, and we want that signal protected, and we do that by covering it in rubber. Well, it's very similar to what happens sort of neurobiologically. The oligodendrocytes exude this exude myelin, which wraps around neurons and makes the transmission down them much faster. And what we sort of the metaphor for this, if you like, oh, I haven't got the picture I wanted there. So when we think about the transfer of water, myelin is essentially building a pipe to make the transfer of water much faster. So it's faster, more efficient, and less is lost. So that's the role it plays in the brain. Now, what we know about myelin, because we can image myelin in humans, which is fantastic, we know that when we practice or rehearse over and over and over and over again, such that something becomes automatic, that is to do with this rehearsal down these neural pathways makes it worthwhile building this myelin pipe. So then we see all this white matter plasticity forming in that area. So for example, in piano players, if you image their brains, and you will find that they have more white matter in their fine motor cortex, so where fine motor control, which is what you'd expect, of course, from hours and hours of practicing the piano. But what's really important about this is that that means that experiences can kind of take shape in our brains in ways that can be imaged. And it also means that some studies in psychiatry are confounded by this, because often what they will do is take a clinical group and compare brain images with a non-clinical group. And when they find differences, think that the difference is due to the underlying pathology. But unless they can control for the repeated experiences, which doesn't just include piano playing, it's not a safe conclusion to draw, because you can't know if the differences that you're seeing in the structure of the brain are to do with experience or to do with this underlying pathology. So that's an interesting confound for some studies. So it's not just piano playing. Also, if you learn to meditate for a couple of weeks, that you can visualize you can image the difference that has in particular areas of the brain, and juggling, and working memory, learning to read, learning a second language. So a number of motor skills as well as sort of cognitive skills sort of take shape in the brain in that way. So we know that experiences leave this transfer in brains. And all of this is adaptive, because it's about learning our environment. It's about being immersed in our environment and sort of adapting ourselves to it. And in evolutionary terms, what we're trying to do is survive to reproduce. So just to summarize what I've spoken about so far, is that it is our neuroplastic mechanisms that turn our lived experiences into biological adaptations that help us to adapt and survive and reproduce in our environment. But the question then is how do we reconcile this with the adverse childhood experiences study? So the adverse childhood experience study, as many of you will know, is they linked adverse childhood experiences, sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. These are their terms: mother treated violently, family member ever imprisoned, substance abuse in the home, mental illness or suicidality. In the second wave of study they also included neglect. And what they were doing was they were linking these early experiences with particular outcomes. And these were the outcomes. 1 in 8 people had more than 4 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which doubled their risks for heart attacks, cancer, stroke, and lung disease. It increased their chances of depression by quadrupled their chances for depression, and increased the risk of using drugs or becoming an alcoholic by 5 to 10 times, and increased the risk of dying by suicide by 12 times. In another separate study, which also included parental separation as a form of adversity, they found that more than 6 ACEs reduced life expectancy by 20 years. And then on the right, you'll see they came up with this pyramid, which is very well known, certainly in trauma-informed circles, of adverse childhood experiences lead to social and emotional cognitive impairments. This is their languaging that I'm using. The adoption of health risk behaviours leading to disease, disability, and social problems, and then early death. So how are we to make sense of this when I've been saying that the experiences we have help us adapt to our environment? And this is where life history theory comes in. So life history theory, well, let's think about rabbits for a moment. So you all know the rabbits are famous for breeding. So what they do is they're born in litters. They mature very quickly. They are prey animals. They're always on the lookout for things that can sort of take them out. And then they in turn breed rapidly and have litters themselves, and as many as possible. And this is sort of a strategic response to being a prey animal that doesn't know how long it may live for. So the rabbit's response to that is to kind of make as many copies of themselves as possible to ensure that their species survives. And then if we contrast that with the elephants have they are very slow to mature. There's more adults than children. They invest very heavily in the 1 or maybe 2 calves that they have, and they breed no more than every 4 years. So there's far fewer, if you like, baby elephants, and they tend to live a very long time. So the rabbits have this kind of fast and furious life strategy, whereas the elephants have a kind of, they invest heavily in their young, and they really want the young to sort of be competitive and be able to survive. So it's a different strategy. But as James Chisholm says, from the perspective of evolution, neither the fast or slow reproductive pattern is better than the other. Neither is biologically normal. What is normal and adaptive depends on the environment. So yes, dying young, so living fast. So that's life history theory as it looks across species, but it also occurs within species too, and particularly within our species, because we are very developmentally plastic. We adapt to all sorts of environments. We learn lots of different languages. We live in lots of different geographies. So we are very responsive to our environment. So life history theory applies to human beings too. And I've chosen to sort of show that here by comparing the old woman who lived in a shoe, who had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some soup without any bread and scolded them soundly and sent them to bed. So that's the old woman who lived in the shoe. And I've chosen to contrast it with the Obama family, who I imagine are very protected against all sorts of social and financial stressors that happen in life. The point that I really would like to make here is that whilst both of these strategies are functional, not many people would choose a fast life history because it's a very stressful way of living. So just to compare a fast and furious life history with a slow and easy life history. So in a slow and easy life history, you biologically get a sense that life will be long. If things are predictable and safe, the biological read you get on that is that life will be long. If life is likely to be long, you can delay gratification. You'll all remember, I'm sure, the studies about where they do on children, which is, would you like 1 marshmallow today or 2 marshmallows tomorrow? And really, the critical point there is, how reliable is it that 2 marshmallows will be here tomorrow? Because everybody knows that 2 marshmallows are better than 1 if you like them. So often the children that would choose, I'll just take the 1 now, may well have not got a sense of reliability. So in a safe world, it's okay to delay gratification because you're going to get it, it's just delayed. In a safe and predictable environment, it also pays to be reflective and empathic. You can assume that there's likely to be some emotional regulation around. It's safe to sexually develop at your own speed. You can have fewer relationships with more trust, seeking out the resources that you want before you start a family, whether that's jobs or partner, home, all of those things. You can delay. There's no need to rush. But in a very dangerous and unpredictable environment, you just don't have that privilege. There is this kind of assumption that life may be short. It's not, you can't delay gratification. It pays to be impulsive. It pays to be exploitative, to take what's available, because what might come around in the long term might not be something you ever have to encounter. It doesn't pay necessarily to pay into a pension or to eat salads or to keep fit or to do all of these other really long-term things, because you might not be around to collect those rewards. And what that can take anyone into is desperately seeking regulation from anywhere, because in adversity, of course, you're dysregulated. So you might be looking anywhere for to get your needs met. What that can do is accelerate sexual reproduction or accelerate sexual development for reproduction and lead to more and more sexually intense relationships and ultimately sort of more children. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is, we talk about ACEs as though they set people off on this kind of, as it says on the pyramid, this sort of dysfunction and impairment where normal healthy development is disrupted. But just to bear in mind that what's normal and healthy depends on the environment that you're in. We adapt to the environments that we're in, and that is what's normal. So just casting a different light on adverse childhood experiences as not necessarily markers of dysfunction, but maybe as markers of life history variation. So I want to bring your attention to the other findings in the adverse childhood experiences, that of the 1 in 8 people that had more than 4 ACEs, what that also did was double their risk for getting sexually transmitted diseases. And it trebled their risks of having more than 50 sexual partners over a lifetime. So if we compare that to what I've said about the life history strategy and this fast and furious, there's the assumption life will be short, don't delay gratification, impulsive, seeking regulation, early sexual development, more and more sexually intense relationships. Now, the desperately seeking regulation, there's no clear metric for that, but it does seem to relate to the tendency to turn to or use drugs, become an alcoholic, to do anything that provides some kind of regulation or some kind of immediate relief from the impact of adverse childhood experiences. So Stephen Hertler very recently wrote this paper, and it's called Life History Evolution Forms the Foundation of the Adverse Childhood Experience Pyramid, which I 100% recommend, but I found quite hard to read, like it's quite a tricky paper to read. But one of his conclusions within this paper are as follows. A life history perspective casts the parenting behaviours associated with adverse childhood experiences, as well as the resultant effects on offspring, as strategic variation as opposed to acquired dysfunction. So rather than being markers of dysfunction and pathology, the social, emotional, cognitive and health effects associated with adverse childhood experiences are framed as integrated adaptations to ecologies. So it's an adaptive outcome. And what that might do is, as well as depathologizing, it might also draw our attention back to the antecedents of these outcomes. Maybe we could change something by changing some of the inequalities rather than focusing on the pathology or this presumed pathology, which has been what's happened. So just to again say, a slow life history is a privilege and not a choice. So neuroplasticity, I've said right at the start, shapes, it's our experiences that shape our brains. And it's our life history theory. It's our experiences that then shepherd us onto our life history strategy. And what do we do with this? Well, it's really empowering, actually, to think that our experiences shape our brain. If we have any wriggle room, if you like, if we have a capacity to choose different experiences, then that's something that can be explored. And again, what we can think about with the life history is that it's a slow life history is a privilege, not a choice. There's not many people who would choose a fast life history. So if our experiences shape our brains, then it sort of follows that different experiences are likely to lead to different brains and these different life history strategies. So I guess I was sort of mulling over this question, that do people who've had slow and easy sort of life experiences on the whole have the same choices as people who've had these sort of fast and furious, these lots of adverse childhood experiences? Do both sets of brains have the same capacity for responsibility? These are questions that have occupied me. So I've done some work with a team called Pathfinder. One of the ways that we're approaching thinking about this. So Pathfinder are a team in Devon and Cornwall Police that try to root people out of the criminal justice system. And so one of the things that we've been talking about there is this idea of things not being your fault, but it being your responsibility for how you take things forward. So rather than this kind of dichotomous approach that we've tended to have, which is this either or, either you are ill or traumatized and not responsible, or you are not ill or traumatized and you are responsible, moving towards this both and approach, where we can both be compassionate for trauma and adversity, but also for the future commit to becoming more accountable. So the idea is moving away from being reactive to having or supporting the capacity to act. And ACT here stands for accountability, compassion, and time, which I'll just move through now. So many of us in different areas of our life feel that we have more capacity to change things than other areas. That's quite common. And language often says where we feel we do have responsibility or the capacity and control to be able to change things, or we don't. So sometimes we may say things like they should, or it just happened, or if you hadn't, they made me, it's my disorder, I was drunk, I just reacted, or it's my trauma. And in trauma-informed circles, then sometimes there's this idea about the lizard brain, and when the lizard brain gets involved, it's this idea that we kind of lose our sort of cognitive faculties, and that's sort of that's simplified, but it's ultimately that's kind of correct. You know, that it's life preserving to almost assume the worst and react quickly and be able to sort of reflect on it later than it is to reflect in the moment and keep yourself in danger. So when we say about talking about choosing your experiences to shape your brain, it's about whether or not there's much capacity to make choices to orientate you in ways that would help you to develop the ways that you would want to. So speaking for myself personally, I was very lucky to get offered very good psychotherapy. And because I found it so helpful, that was an experience that I continued to choose to support myself through in order to perhaps move away a little from this sort of fast life response into a kind of a slower life response. So we'd encourage people to take as much responsibility as they can and use their choices in the ways they can in order to become accountable. So I pulled this horrible judgmental meme off the internet about this young woman, and I obviously don't know anything about her, but I imagine that she may be someone who's had many adverse childhood experiences. It fits the kind of fast life history approach. And what happens is there's this judgmental response of blames politicians for her poverty. So we've all got a moralizing part in us where we think people should just make better choices. However, what life history theory shows us is that evolution has been at this for hundreds of thousands of years. And the weight of evolution is sort of pushing us or shepherding us towards particular life history strategies. And that's happening for all of us. So we're all likely to be shepherded. And if we're shepherded towards a slow life history, then that's lucky for us, because that's socially approved of. That's a desirable place to be. So instead of being judgmental, what we might need to be is compassionate. And that's compassionate with ourselves and others, and gratitude, I guess, gratitude for being shepherded onto a slow life history where that's the case for any of us. And in terms of time, the difference between blame and accountability is whether or not we're looking at the past or whether or not we're looking to the future. So when we're using blaming narratives, we're tending to focus on what can't be changed. We can't change our genes, our childhood, the experiences we've had, the neural pathways we've got, how we reacted or how others reacted to us, and we can't change our parents. But if we're looking to the future, thinking about what can be changed, what might I be able to make a difference to? Well, we can't know it because we can never access this information directly, but our epigenetics, those things can be changed. Our neural pathways can be changed. Our highways can be changed. We might have a bit of wriggle room about the kinds of experiences we orientate ourselves towards. Our thoughts and feelings can change, and our responses can change. And society, well, I very often say that because life history theory is an ecological theory, it is about how we adapt to what is around us, then really, if we want to change some of the outcomes from this, then we need to look at the ecology in which they've come from. So that means society attending to the kinds of inequalities there are in it and trying to put some of that right. At least that would give people who want to be able to change some traction in order to do so. Because if there's no possibility for choosing differently, then nothing different can happen. So people can't do this on their own. They need support of other people and society around them in order to be able to do this. So in terms of time, I encourage people, and I try to do this myself, to develop this idea of future me. What would be better in my future? What does future me want? How can I make life a bit easier for future me? Because that's the critical point about slow and fast life history, is the kind of our time horizon. How much into the future are we looking to? What are we planning for? Am I just planning to get past the next moment, get past the next moment, get past the next moment? Certainly my week has been like that. But also having an eye on the future. What do I really want that to look like? And Homer Simpson demonstrates this beautifully. So this is Homer pouring a bottle of vodka into a jar of mayonnaise in order to drink it and try that out. And Marge sort of says, you know, is that a wise idea? And Homer's response is, that's a problem for future Homer. I don't envy that guy. So that's maybe the thing that we want to get away from, is just that kind of disregard for that bit in the future. So I've spoken today I've spoken about neuroplasticity and the kinds of mechanisms that exist that transduce our experience in the environment into these biological adaptations. But they adapt according to evolution, which is about surviving long enough to reproduce. And our experiences can then shepherd us onto these fast or slow life history strategies, which is the strategy for reproduction that seems most, or that evolution, if you like, judges is likely to be the most successful in the environment that we find ourselves in. But in order to think about maybe changing some of this, moving away from a fast life strategy, I've talked about trying to build up accountability. I've also talked about being compassionate. I've talked about developing a sense of future me and orientating all of us to what we can do for ourselves and what we can do for each other and what we can do in society to help that happen. Okay, so that's my last slide with a quote by David Eagleman. And if anyone's interested in this approach, I've got a workshop coming up on the 29th of November. And if you would like more information about that, then just have a look on the Zebra website, which is www.zebra.coop. All right, thank you very much for your attention this afternoon and your patience with me at the start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Haley, for the wonderful presentation. Now I'm very delighted to introduce you our second speaker today, Danny and Mike. So Danny and Mike, they are the co-founders of Let's Like Us. It is a Manchester-based nonprofit organization. So Let's Like Us is decided to helping men from all backgrounds to heal from adverse childhood experience. And they focuses on creating centralized data and research around men and trauma in criminal and antisocial behaviors, connecting external industry experts and organizations to help men with similar experience. And they believe when male trauma is acknowledged and addressed directly, it created to be understanding for victims of why they have acted in a way they have post-abuse and offer them a way into recovery, which in turn will lead to the healthier and happier families, safer communities, and lead to a reduction in antisocial behaviors and criminal activities. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Danny and Mike.
Just to throw in there, we've also got a B in PE between us as well, haven't we, Mike? So
yeah,
let's not miss that one off. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Haley. Can you hear me okay? Mine's thing's gone a bit quiet.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you very well.
Yeah. Right, okay. God, that's like sort of, you blew my head off a bit there, mate. You know, with all the science stuff. I don't know about you, Mike. It was like just a bit a bit easy for me when you explained it on the phone and like sort of broke it down and stuff.
Let's talk about it after.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to kind of sort of touch on today, so Dr. Haley spoke about you know, the brain and how it works and all that kind of stuff, and how it's like sort of formed through trauma and stuff. So you know, we just wanted to kind of sort of bring that to life if possible, share a bit of our lived experiences and talk around like sort of professional curiosity as well. So, you know, and God, every time I hear that about the aces, I think, geez, I think thanks for knocking like 20 years. Thanks for that little reminder, knocking 20 years off my life and that. You know what I mean? Because we both like sort of score quite high in the aces. Yeah, so just to kick off, just a bit of my kind of like sort of background. Obviously, we've not got really that much time today, but kind of sort of tick all those boxes. What you was talking about here. Starting off with like sort of vulnerability, but starting off with like sort of the mum thing as well. So, you know, my mum abandoned me when I was a baby, when I was like 18 months old. So she disappeared, you know, and didn't have that. So I didn't have that kind of like sort of motherly love and ultimately didn't have that kind of that sense of belonging. You know, it left me vulnerable. I didn't have those people there, like taking care of me and looking after me, and sort of didn't develop properly, really, like you kind of sort of stated there. You know, with my mum and dad not being around, you know, that led to me being sexually abused off my granddad, and you know, that kind of affected me greatly from the ages of like 5 to 10. You know, that kind of shaped me schooling. So didn't listen at school, didn't pay attention, basically. So I didn't know how to cope with the sexual abuse that had gone on. So that came out. I didn't have the words to talk about the trauma at that time. Didn't understand what was happening, to be totally honest with you. And that kind of I won't say it come out sideways, because it came out the way that it was supposed to. It came out with behaviour, and you know, the professionals that was around me at that time either didn't care or didn't have the flipping intelligence to spot what was going on. You know, so how that impacted me was like sort of running away from home, disappearing from a young age, the police having to come out and look for me, packing a bag and leaving. You know, not concentrating in class, always staring out the window, kicking off, you know, all displaying all these kind of behaviours, but nobody ever sat me down and said, Daniel, what is up with you? Why are you behaving like this? I just got labelled a little shit, basically. And that kind of sort of followed me through. What my granddad did when he sexually abused me, he smashed my boundaries, and I became one of them kids who wouldn't say no. So it'd be like, Daniel, do this, Daniel, do that. I'd do it to fit in because I wanted that sense of belonging from that stuff that was missing. And I became one of those kids who'd never say no, which led to me getting into a lot of trouble. So just like fast forwarding quickly, because we've not much time. So, you know, by the time you get into secondary school, by the time I got past 10, if somebody had have asked me, I'd have been sexually abused or experienced trauma, I think before 10, with some help and some guidance and someone exercising professional curiosity like professionals are supposed to, I'd have probably spoke out and I'd have probably said. But once I got past 10 and got into secondary school, what I'd developed over time is I learned to put masks on to cope with what was happening. So like one of my first ones was like being like sort of, you know, being happy-go-lucky. So by the time I got into secondary school, if you'd looked to me, they probably thought I was fine. He's always messing about, always laughing and joking, all that kind of stuff. But that was a mask that I learned to put on so people couldn't see into me, because by that time, I was frightened, I was scared. I was, you know, I was more like sort of self-aware. And it's like, how am I going to protect myself from the world? So the next kind of mask that I put on was like sort of do not approach. So like, you know, walking about with my hood up, you know, all that kind of stuff. All that toxic masculinity stuff that kind of that comes in for a very good reason, because we do that stuff to I can only speak for myself, obviously. We do, but I was doing that stuff to protect myself because I didn't want anyone to approach me. So, you know, I was a scared little boy running about in a flipping, you know, teenager's body than an adult's body. And by the time we got to 15, to cut a long story short, I was groomed and sexually abused and raped by a drug dealer who took me under his wing and flipping, you know, your dad's not around, I'll look after you. And that was the positive male kind of sort of role model in my life. This guy who was doing all this stuff to me. You know, so by the time I was 15 and a half, I was selling drugs for him in school, and I had a full-blown habit on heroin and crack as well. I was coming in school absolutely off my face, absolutely levered, flipping. But no one was questioning. Do you know what I mean? There was a guy who, you know, who was picking me up, who was 10 years older than me, picking me up in my school uniform. Nobody questioned. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, he's a little shit, you know, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, that followed me through into later life. And the next thing, you know, I end up in prison. And without like sort of boring you with the light flipping, you know, the long story, that led to, you know, prison, probation, flipping, mental health units. You know, I was just on that on that revolving door, and all it would have took is someone, a professional, to stick the foot in the door, stop the door from spinning, saying, "Are you okay, mate? Has something happened to you when you was younger?" So this is why we go on about million pieces, because there's we believe from our experience, there's a misconception that if you ask someone have they experienced any trauma, they're going to smash into a million pieces. From what we've seen and learned from working with other boys and men and ourselves, is that it doesn't open a can of worms, it opens a door, and it opens a door to healing. And you know, how it's like, it gets me mad, to be honest with you, because it's like, how dare professionals call themselves professionals and work in these fields but haven't got the balls to ask these questions. And you know, we know the flipping suicide rate and how high it is. But you know, I'm not dismissing women or anything, but we work with men, and I'm a man, so I can't speak for women. We know how high that stuff is. So you know, how dare you, as like a sort of a professional, really not have the balls or the common sense or the inclination to kind of ask this question. You know, professional curiosity saves flipping lives. It really does. You know what I mean? And sometimes all it takes is for somebody to kind of sort of ask that question. You know, I've not got like sort of much time really to go into stuff, because I want to hand over to Mike as well. You know, the reason I sorted myself out, to cut a long story short, is when I was like in my 30s, I had a drug worker, and he was shit hot. And first time I seen him, he was like, "God, Daniel, I don't know what to do with you. Do you know what I mean? I've tried everything with you." And I thought, if he doesn't know what to do with me, I clearly don't know what to do with me. I better go out there and just shit at this recovery stuff. I'll just go out there, and I'm all right at taking drugs. I'm all right at committing crime. And I know about all that stuff, and people like me there. Do you know what I mean? It was easier to fit into that than it was to like with you lot in like sort of normal society. I'm not saying you've all had perfect lives or anything, but you know what I'm saying. It was easier to do that. So went out, did a bit more crime and a bit more drug use and everything what comes with it. Then went back to see this guy because I was in pieces. And when I went back to see him, he sat me down. He went, "Something happened to you when you was a kid," and he told me a little bit about some stuff what had happened to him, and it was like, excuse me swearing, thank fuck for that, right? Because yeah, he was the first person I'd ever met in my life. Yeah, another man telling me he's been sexually abused. Have you been through something like that? He spotted it. He exercised professional curiosity, sorry. And what he did is he gave me the best gift ever. He gave me permission to speak. He told me it was okay to talk about this stuff. And that kind of links in with part of my reason for being like sort of part of Lads Like Us is because I kind of made that promise that day that what he did for me, I would do for other people. Do you know what I mean? Or do for another person at least. And Michael talk about the power of one if we've got time, Mike, and how that kind of sort of works from our perspective. So kind of like sort of rush through things there. Do you know what I mean? But all I'm trying to say to you within your practice, and if you can pass anything on to anyone else, is be that person who gives people permission to speak, because that shit saves life. Professional curiosity that saves lives. Do you know what I mean? It's not rocket science. You don't have to have a million degrees or a million qualifications. We've got a B&P between us, and flipping, we do all right. Asking people about this stuff, have they experienced trauma? What it's about for me, it's about being a flipping human being. You don't need mad crazy qualifications, do you know what I mean, to be a human being, and not just listen to people, but to hear people. Do you know what I mean? So I would just throw it over to you there, Mike, because we need to condense this down. Go on, mate.
Yeah, so for me, firstly, again, thank you, Haley, for going through what you went through there. I'll be honest, it was interesting to look at the different things that trauma can do, that can be generated by and sort of play a part in the evolution of our brains. It's mad to think that all that stuff from the past can sort of contribute to that. For me, a similar story to Dan. I'm not really going to talk too much about the trauma. I'm going to talk about the after effects of the trauma, because I think that's what's most relevant right here. Yeah, I went through sexual abuse. Yeah, I went through trauma. I went through physical abuse. I ended up going to a boarding school where I was battered and whatever else. There was a lot of different things that as part of my growing up shouldn't have happened. But it's again, it goes back to the after effects. I wasn't able to maintain, up until 10 years ago, I should say, I wasn't able to maintain normal relationships. Normal relationships was just something that I would really, really struggle with. And it wasn't because it was something that I was doing within the relationship. It was because I was attracting the wrong kind of people. I was seeking the wrong kind of emotion, if you wish. It wasn't about love, it was about connection. And I felt that, going into a relationship, whether it be a sexual or non-sexual relationship, it was a connection. And because I've lacked in connections for so long as a kid, I think it's something you kind of cling on to. It's something that has caused me many problems. The types of relationships that I've had, again, with the relationships comes the emotional maturity. For me, I'm 36 years old, and Dan will back me up with this. I am like a kid. I genuinely, I'm emotionally mature. I've got my own kids, but I am the biggest kid that you could possibly come across. And, I call it kind of like Peter Pan syndrome, simply because I don't want to grow up. I want to be able to live as that child that wasn't able to live back then. If I could show you behind my laptop, I actually went out the other day and I spent £30 on an enormous bag of Lego. Now I've got kids, but for me, if I'm having a shit day, I know for a fact I'll be able to reach for that Lego and sit with that Lego, because it will stimulate part of my mind that Lego used to before all that happened when I was a child. It's about trying to sort of use my young mind, so to speak, to be able to live a better quality of life. But the quality of life that I'm living now is far better than I ever expected. Yeah, I know I've gone through ACEs. Yeah, I know, all these different things have happened to me. Thanks, Haley, for reminding us that I'm going to die 20 years earlier, because that's amazing. Thanks for telling me I'm going to end up sleeping with 50 women and whatever else. It's what an experience life has been. But in saying that, it's not all badness. It isn't all badness. It is badness. And I've woke up in some rather interesting places, I'm not going to lie. However, my life now is completely different to what you'd expect it to be. I got caught up in guns and crime and gangs and all this shit that I shouldn't have done when I was young. But again, it goes back to that acceptance, that needing, that feeling part of something. I've done some crazy things in my life. Like, I know this is quite an academic thing, but I thought it'd be an amazing idea to become a paedophile hunter. And I was successful at it. I was a really good paedophile hunter, but it made me ill. It made me really ill because what I was actually doing in that sense was trauma reenactment. I was trying to reenact the trauma that I've been through. So I, in form, had some control over it. And that in turn made me ill. You know, all of these different things that I'm living in life and all of these different experiences that I've had are linked to the trauma. And there are some things that, you know, I've enjoyed. I've been in some crazy situations. And I've had a lot of fun with it, but I've also had a lot of hurt with it and a lot of frustration and a lot of anger. I've been with my partner now that I'm with for 11 years. I don't know how I've done it. I don't know how I've managed to keep her for so long. She's not in a cage, don't worry, but I don't know how I've been able to keep her for so long. But you know, I'm now in a place where I'm in a relationship that's actually based on love, that's based on respect, that's based on you know, I believe anyway, relationships should be about empowerment. If you're with someone and you're in a relationship with them, it should be about empowering that person to grow in a positive way, to grow emotionally and socially, and to support that person and watch that person grow, and actually to take pride in the fact that you're watching that person grow and helping that person on the journey. It took me a long time to reach that part of my life, because for a long time I didn't even know who I was or where I fitted in, who I was meant to be. So 11 years we've been together this year, and she's literally taught me how to love myself. You know, one of the most basic principles is knowing who you are and loving who you are. And I know a lot of people can't say that they love who they are, but I love the person that I've turned into. You know, I never expected to be able to go through so much trauma and so much madness and come out the other end with a 20-year death sentence, far too many notches on the bedpost, and, you know, bipolar, manic depression, personality disorders. There's loads of different things that have contributed to my madness, but I've come through them all. I hope anyway. I hope there's no more bumps in the road or surprises, because I'm getting too old for it now. I'm getting way too old for it, you know. Me and Dan have been doing what we've been doing now for 15 months, 16 months. And the only thing this has brought me is relief. And if I'm honest, it's given little Mike a little bit of, I wouldn't say closure. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully close that door. But I think what's happened is as I've matured, what I've been able to do is realize how strong that young person was, even though that young person's me, and I'm speaking about him, you know, as a separate, like, he was one strong young man for the stuff that he went through. And he was, you know, he was just, he was a little shit. He was naughty. He got involved in guns and drugs and gangs and all these different things. But I think depending on the people that you've got around you, and depending on your view and your emotion and the way you feel about your abuse and ACEs, I think that is massively dependent on how far you're able to move forward. I don't know what the science is behind that, but I definitely know that since I've made peace with my abuse and my traumas, and since I've accepted there's nothing I can do to change them, I've lived excuse me, a completely different quality of life, because I'm not defined by them now. You know, my demons do not have me in a headlock. In fact, it's them that's in the cage, not my missus. You know, they don't hurt me anymore. I'm not defined by it anymore. I'm not affected by it anymore, because, you know, I went for some just lastly, I went for some cognitive behavioural therapy as kind of part of my recovery. And I went for this CBT, and I said to the lady that was delivering the CBT, what is your view on talking about my past? And she put her hands up like this, and she said, right, okay, so on one hand, you've got the emotions of the little boy that you were. On the other hand, you've got the emotions of the man that you now are. Which of those two emotions do you live in every single day? And I said, it's a mixture of both of them. And she said to me, and it blew my mind. She said, this is what you need to separate. She said, because you're no longer a little boy. You're a fully grown man. You need to stop living as the little boy and remember that you are now the man. And if that was to happen to you now, or anyone tried to do that to you now, it wouldn't happen because you protect yourself. And as a child, you were vulnerable and unable to protect yourself. It wasn't your fault. And that, I'm not going to lie, that kind of opened the door to setting me free. Because when you realize it's not your fault and you didn't participate and you were forced into them situations and you didn't choose those situations for yourself, that's when you realize that actually I've been blaming myself and cursing myself for so long and hating myself for allowing, in inverted commas, this stuff to happen when it didn't need to happen. But actually, it wasn't my fault that it happened. And once you realize that and you start to sort of take the pieces apart, you can see that all of the walls, all of the barriers, all of the defense mechanisms, everything that you've got in life when you go into adulthood are things that you've put there yourself as a form of protection. Your chains are your own. And once I realized that, I was truly able to start living, not surviving, not recovering, but healing and living. And for me, that's the biggest part of it. So yeah, I'll return it to you, Dr. Haley, or who's.
Let me just come in a sec there, Mike.
Okay.
You know, it's not dead simple, and it's not dead. It's not dead simple. This stuff, obviously, recovery and all that kind of stuff. But
Dan, you muted yourself.
Like one of my biggest and strongest weapons in my toolbox, ironically, was flipping vulnerability, and that was the sharpest tool in my box because in order to like sort of get well and get better and talk about this stuff, had to get vulnerable. That was a real difficult thing to do because last time I got vulnerable, I was sexually abused and I was raped. So why on God's green earth would I take that risk? You know what I mean? And get vulnerable with somebody else. Why on God's green earth I take that risk is because somebody explained to me about vulnerability and what the kind of like sort of other and like sort of true meaning of it was, and how powerful it is. Learning to cast aside that toxic masculinity bullshit. You know what I mean? In order to like sort of get well, and I've got to say this. So our mate Wayne's on this thing. I'm not like throwing on your toes or anything here.
Yes, Wayne.
Wayne's one of our friends, and we'd all used to run a peer support group together and stuff. And if there was any one person, Mike, who like sort of proves and shows that recovery from trauma is possible, do you know what I mean? It's you, Wayne. You know what I mean? Hopefully we'll be seeing more of Wayne doing stuff with us in the future and stuff. And he can, like, when he's ready or whatever. Wayne's always ready to talk about
Wayne really is a prime example, prime example of what, there is no model of recovery, but he's a prime example of what strength is. And we was lucky enough to be able to see him twice go to court and take his horrible person to court. And I've got to be honest, on the day that he was finally sentenced, what Wayne didn't realize is that on that day he got a little bit of justice for all of us, because we was able to sit on that journey with him after a long time of listening to how hurt he actually was and how it had affected him. So Wayne, honestly, Wayne, I know I say it all the time, mate, but you just continue to make us proud every single day, brother.
Because it's like you think, God, you're dealing with trauma all the time. All this shit, all these bad things, all this crap you're listening to. Well, yeah, there is loads of shit and it is horrible, it is hanging. But also on the flip side of that, you see people flipping get well. Do you know what I mean? You see people reclaim their lives, and ultimately, what all this is about for us is taking back power and control. Do you know what I mean? From those who flip in who raped it off you and took it off you, basically. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, learning to flipping live your life, and it is. And people say, "Oh God, are you all right?" I'm not minimizing this, oh, by the way. But people say, "Oh God, are you all right?" Talking about this stuff. You know what I mean? How's it affecting you and all that? It's like, I'm not all right. Not if I can say this properly, I'm not all right not talking about this stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's when I'm not talking about this stuff, or we're not talking about stuff, that's when we're not okay. Do you know what I mean? No, if we couldn't talk about this stuff, and I know I'm going on about it, but in recovery wasn't possible, we'd be in the fetal position, under the table in the corner. Do you know what I mean? You know, we just want to cast that message out there. You know, no matter what you have been through, do you know what I mean? You can get well from this stuff, and you can recover, and you can live. You know, one of the biggest keys for me was acceptance, and accepting that I can do fuck all about what's happened. Basically, there's nothing I can do about what's happened, but I can do something about taking responsibility for my behaviour. All that stuff that I've done when I was a little shit, from being a child to a flipping teenager to an adult. There's a reason why I was behaving, but it's not an excuse. Do you know what I mean? So it's the same. Why I'm saying that, it's the same thing for recovery. No one else can do your recovery for you. You've got to do your recovery for yourself, and you've got to take responsibility. And for me, I had to accept there was fuck all I can do about what's happened to me. But we can't. This is why we started out on this mission, and we deliver training to different types of professionals and social workers and people like that, because, you know, there's no point having a pop at these people, because it wasn't them who failed us. It wasn't them who sexually abused us. It wasn't those professionals who let us down. They might have been from their service. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, instead of having a pop at these people and just being dead angry and shouting at them and getting nowhere, how can we make something positive out of it? How can we polish a turd, basically, from our trauma? Do you know what I mean? And you can polish a turd, and me and Mike and Wayne are gleaming. Do you know what I mean? And I'll like sort of leave it there. I don't know if have we got time to like throw it out for questions, or if anyone wants to say anything. How we work is no question is off limits. So we're here to be as transparent and honest as possible with you. So you can ask us anything. Don't think, oh, I can't say that. I can't say that. You can ask anything. That's why we're flipping here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Danny and Mike, for sharing your personal experiences. Our personal stories are so powerful and it really relates to the series and knowledge shared by Hayley as well. So now we are opening to the floor to you, the audiences, and if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and you can ask yourself, turn on your videos and phone, or you can just send down the chat box. Or if Dr. Peckham and Danny, if you have questions for each other, you can also have a discussion if you want.
Yeah, go on.
Hi, Danny.
Go on,
Hi, Mike. Look, I thank you. I'm 100% glad that I got hold of you guys and that you were willing to do this with me. Thank you very much. Some of the things that I heard you say, like the words were empowerment and connection and belonging and who you've got around you. And that thing that you said so powerfully, Mike, it was somebody saying it's not your fault. And I really hope, right, so I've got a foot in trauma, and I've got a foot in academia and a foot in clinical work, right? 3 feet, I know. And what I really want to try and do is that narrative of it's not my fault, this is a response. It's a response to what I've been around. And what I want us to do, clinicians, society, is be able to be the ecological niche that makes it easier to recover, makes it easier to get the experiences you need of trust, of empowerment, of having someone safe to be vulnerable with. Because I think those are the transformative experiences, and neuroplasticity being what it is, brains are alive to that kind of difference. So that's my, I'm sort of trying to straddle some barriers in the same way that I think that you guys are too, but in a different accent as well, I think. So thank you.
Did somebody have the hand up then?
Fisherman.
Fisherman.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Mary Fisher rather than Fisherman.
Oh, right,
I
Fisherman.
am a mum
Fisherman.
as well. I am a mum as well. It was really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and it was really able to relate that to what Hayley had described so articulately, to the science was so well described. I suppose I'm speaking as a profession, and I'm a nurse by background and got an experience. I work as a safeguarding nurse. We've got Devon Trauma Network that I'm part of. So we're really working hard within our locality to really understand the impact of trauma on the individuals, people that we work with, and also ourselves, obviously. And I would say that we're in Devon, we're really working hard to try and look at that system-wide, but it will be evolving. On a person, I'm a nurse, I'm a wife, I'm a mum, fisherman, and also my grandmother. And one of my daughters, this is deeply personal, but one of my daughters has adopted 2 children who've experienced profound neglect and have very challenging behaviours. And it's very, I suppose I worry terribly about my daughter and her husband in the experiences that they go through trying to support these children. And I suppose the question I've got is in terms of neuroplasticity and support, relating that to supporting people who've experienced trauma. Is there real evidence that with real support and love and affection and direction, that the neuroplasticity can change so that it becomes more of a sort of, what was it, a slow and easy rather than fast and furious? And that's, I suppose I would like to see some hope for these 2 children that are my grandchildren.
So I think you've couched that very much in terms of neuroplasticity, but I guess I think that Mike and Danny sort of answer this as well as I do, which is that yes, change absolutely is possible. How much change from a kind of scientific perspective, I think that's a hard to know question. And my sense of certainly children are quite sort of raw in a sense. They haven't got to adulthood to build up more and more and more defenses. So there's a really raw experience there. And sometimes children test, and sometimes adults test as well. And when you're testing, there's an optimism in testing, and the optimism is it's worth testing. But sometimes adults stop testing and they shut down and shut away, and they stop being vulnerable because they've been let down too often to want to even test again. They've already learned the lesson. So children, and Mike and Danny, let me know what you think about this, but when children are sort of doing that, sort of behaving in ways that adults find really, really difficult, there's opportunity in that all the time. In terms of the neuroplasticity evidence, I'm not sure. These are not tests that you could do, so I think the evidence kind of comes from lived experience. So I don't know what do you guys think,
I think the best answer to that is that, like, sort of there is hope. Do you know what I mean? And the hope with a lot of the time that we share our journey is we use our journey and our experiences as a like sort of vehicle of hope for other people, really. And you know, I can't back this up with science or anything like that. But to be quite honest with you, the majority of people that I've seen get well a lot faster has been young people and children, because I think when we get caught later in life and someone exercise professional to help us, or for whatever reason, we've already caused a shit ton more of damage to ourselves. So we're just trauma and trauma and trauma. Mike spoke then before, sorry, about getting involved in gangs and all that kind of stuff, and the same with like sort of drug use and going to prison. All that stuff comes with their own trauma, doesn't it? So it becomes, as the older we get, I think the harder it is to flipping unpick, because that ball of wool becomes so big. But if you catch, it's all about early intervention, isn't it? You know what I mean? And prevention. If you catch it when they're young, do you know what I mean? I think it's not a lot easier. But I've just seen kids get well quicker, to be honest with you, when they've been given the right interventions. It's a simple way of saying it. Mike?
Just by listening to you today gives me personal hope. And I, on my own personal work, I just really hope that we can share some of our increased understanding about people's experiences of trauma and the impact it has. I mean, from my perspective, it's within a health setting, but it's wider than that, isn't it? It's society. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question in the room, so please.
Hello, and thank you very, very much, all of you, for this panel. I'm Natalie Ohana, I'm from the law school. And I have two kind of thoughts that I wanted to share. The first is what Danny said about that idea that trauma kind of breaks you to a million pieces. But it's actually not the trauma, it's the social neglect, it's the social indifference after that trauma. And if someone would only ask the question, if someone would only care, a lot of that harm could have been prevented. And I'm just, it sounds like a kind of one comment that Danny just said, but if we take that comment very seriously and we look into academic work about trauma, I think that that sentence can really question the like whether academic knowledge is very valid, and kind of give us a way to be more critical about what we think we know to be truth. Because at the moment, I think that trauma studies are very much based on that idea that trauma breaks you to pieces, and there isn't enough focus on social indifference and social neglect. That's my first thought. And my second thought is that every time we hear about, new research, new studies, I think a question that we need to think about more is how would that affect relationships between the service provider, right, and the person who experienced trauma? What can be said about that relationship in the light of, again, what Danny said about it's all about reclaiming your power. It's all about reclaiming yourself, your control. What are all those studies, right, and research do in that respect of power and agency? When we think about trauma-informed practice, do we mainly think about compassion, or are we actually focusing on that question of agency, of the person leading their healing, or the person leading other people in their healing? Or is there a power element there that maybe maintains more power in the disciplinary part that needs to be really, really questioned?
Can I just jump in there? I think when it comes to being trauma-informed and trauma-informed practice, the one thing that needs to be taken into consideration is that every single person you're going to come across in professional practice, it doesn't matter what job you do, whether you're a housing officer, social worker, working in NHS, working on mental health wards, even working as a receptionist in the doctors, there's going to be people that you come across on a day-to-day basis that have all experienced different levels of trauma and different types of trauma that may affect them in the same way as people who may have suffered types of trauma that naturally you would think would have a bigger impact. So when it comes to being trauma informed, it is about, there's a power in being trauma informed when you're using it as an emotional tool. Because the one thing a lot of people fail to do in when working directly with vulnerable people is that they lose I've witnessed it myself. They lose the power and the realization that actually that they have a great power to be able to make a change on how that person looks at services, on how that person approaches services, but at the same time, how that person walks out of the door feeling. You know, what I've struggled with a lot of my life is validation. And what I've realized is that I was seeking validation from people about the abuse that I've been through, because I wanted people to know and acknowledge that I've been through abuse. But then when I started looking down a trauma-informed lens and I started thinking about what trauma-informed is and trauma-informed practice, it's got nothing to do with more than just understanding, taking yourself down onto that person's level and actually using the power that you have, not in qualification, not in degrees, not in anything like that, actually getting down and using the power that you have as a human being, just simply as a human. There's no academia that comes into it. It's about generally giving a shit and getting down onto a level with the person and trying to understand why they're on that path. You might not get the answer as to why they're on that path. You might not be able to understand immediately why they're on that path, but you might be the first person that they've spoken to that's actually got down onto that level and tried to understand them, instead of just looking at the fact that they're, you know, as an example, sitting in A&E, they've took an overdose and they've got, you know, self-harm all over their arms. You're not just looking at it as another person that's pissed and has, you know, got themselves into a bit of a muddle. You're actually looking at it as someone who's suffered significant trauma. And then what you can do, which is something I forgot to mention before, is you can use the power of one. Just one. If you approach every single person that's got trauma with a trauma-informed approach, with each of them people, you have the power to change not only the relationship that services will have directly with those people, but also repairing the relationships that those people will have directly with services. If you go in with a trauma-informed approach and you do it, you know, a lot of people say professional boundaries and this and that. If you go in with a little bit more heart and a little bit more humility, empathy, and understanding, you will get so much more out of a person, because that person might not have an understanding of what you're trying to say as a professional. They might not understand those terms. They might not get those terms. If you're trauma-informed, you don't need to be asking questions about how long have you, you know, how long is this, how long is that. If you're trauma informed, actually what you're doing is creating a bond with this person who's probably never had that kind of communication in their lives, because their view of the system instantly, as soon as they come into any service, they're hypervigilant. And the reason that they're hypervigilant is because they've lived a life of hypervigilance, because, you know, it's shown that when you go through ACEs and significant childhood trauma, the cognitive development of your brain is stunted, you know, because you can't live that life as a normal child. So actually you're living with hypervigilance for the majority of your life. When people are coming into services, straight away they're going to be hypervigilant, because all they think is that they're going to be dismissed, they're going to be overlooked, no one's going to care, because that's the general view of how they view the world based on what happened when they was younger. And a lot of people are still stuck in that not victim mode, not, you know, self-pity mode, but a lot of people are still stuck in that mode, whereas they still feel like the system's against them, even though all they want to do is just get a hug off someone, cry, and talk about what's going on and how they're feeling. You know, it's about using your natural human abilities to be able to ask questions and be kind. It goes much more than academic. You just got to be a kind person and give a shit. You have the opportunity every single day to go out, and I use the power of one. The power of one is my thing, and it's something that I created quite a while ago. And the power of one is that for me, it's not even about academic life. I don't use it in academic life anymore. I use it in all of life, because everybody's got the opportunity to go out and make a difference in one person's day. If you can make a difference in someone's day, or you can change how someone's perception of the day or the world is, or you can, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but you can turn that frown upside down and you can put a smile on someone's face. Why would you not do that? Why would you not do that? And it's about giving this back to doctors and you know, people that are dealing with vulnerable people from whatever profession it is that they're in, because you don't need a degree to be kind to someone. You don't need to be a doctor to be kind to someone. You can use your academic and human, human abilities, match the pair of them up while maintaining professional boundaries, and actually get much more out of somebody than you normally would, just by looking like you care, by looking like you're box ticking and looking like your due diligence and form filling is based on trying to do the best for that person, if that makes sense. That's the way I can explain it. I don't see trauma-informed and academic pairing up and being together. I see you can pair them up together, but right now there isn't enough trauma-informed and there's too much academic, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Mike. And we are a little bit over time, but we're going to get all the questions. So here is a question in the chatting box. I will read the question, and then Viv, you can ask your question as well, and then the speakers can make response. And so a question from Rabia Rifat, and his question is for Mike. It is related to how your experiences with engaging with the justice system. So do you feel as though the law understood and appreciated your experiences? Or indeed, did you feel as though the law could be shaped to adequately acknowledge the effects to your experiences? And Viv, you can ask your question too.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Viv.
Hi, really nice to see you, Mike. Nice to see your face, Danny. And really great to hear all of you speak. Thanks. I'm Viv. I'm a child sex abuse survivor activist, and so I'm obviously really interested in all of this conversation. And it was really great to hear you speak, Hayley. I had a couple of things that I just wanted to sort of reflect on, really, and about you know, that thing you were saying about how the brain patterning, how you can't tell how things that can be picked up in the brain, whether it's through people's experiences or whether it's a pathology. And I just wanted to say how interesting I've found that, and how often our experiences are pathologized, and so that feels like a really good nugget of information to sort of take away from your talk. I've had some feelings about when you were talking about, I mean, the ACEs are quite sort of contested anyway, aren't they, as a way, a lens to see trauma through, but particularly when you were talking about, I just wanted to sort of flag it up really, about when you were talking about STIs and sexual partners and things, and that a lot of those statistics would be skewed through sexual abuse and exploitation and stuff. So a lot of people who have been sexually abused would have STIs as a result of that. And so to sort of put that in as an outcome, I don't know, it just felt a little bit clunky to me. So I just wanted to feed that back. I don't know if I'm making sense. That it, I suppose the sort of outcomes for people, there's that thing, isn't there, about sort of what's fault and what's responsibility, sort of suggests that those things come from people maybe being promiscuous, whereas often those things come from people being abused. So that was the bit that I just wanted to flag up about how that's talked about. And then I thought the most interesting thing is that question that you've got in brackets. You know, is it it's not your or our fault. It's not your or our, it's your or our responsibility. And I think so much of the conversation is individualized around survivors and how we respond to our trauma and how we then conduct our lives. And then actually in this conversation, what we're hearing over and over again is it is about survivors and how we do that, but also it's about services and how those are conducted. And there's just a much wider systemic perspective about how society is. You know, where is the study around the brain chemistry of all the people who are looking the other way while this is happening constantly in society on a scale that we can't even comprehend? You know, where it's that sort of focus on the individuals that just is slightly uncomfortable as, you know, in terms of what needs to happen systemically to make change, I really loved the stuff you were talking about how having a slow life is a privilege. And then it's like, actually, how do people who have that ally with people like us who haven't had that, and how much the change making potential in that, and broadening it out to really include that idea beyond sort of us and our responses. I suppose that's what I wanted to say. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Speakers, you can.
If I can, yeah, so I think the points that you're making are exactly the points that I'm also trying to make, which is that the things that happen to us as children are not things that we could possibly be responsible for, but they are things that we adapt to. And the privilege of a slow life history is to not have to adapt to those experiences. So then what I'm wanting the evolutionary approach to do is to draw society's attention away from judgment and away from pathologization and towards, hang on, if we don't like to think of these things happening, or we don't like the outcomes of these things in terms of the kind of social and health implications of them, then let's prevent them. And let's also be really hold in mind some gratitude for the fact that we don't have to cope with that stuff. Like if we haven't had to cope with that stuff, then let's use that gratitude that we haven't to make the effort to understand what it might be like to live through. And that's why, you know, hearing Mike and Danny's story and yours as well, thank you, is really powerful, because as you say, these are, no one would choose that. These are things that have happened, and then we make our way in lives. We make the best way in lives that we can, that we know how to do, until we get something that changes something for us, and we can choose then to sort of move towards a different way of living. But we need that help. Like Mike and Danny, I think both spoke about particular individuals in their life who gave them something that made a difference, and then that starts off a trajectory. And I think what they're sort of what I'm hearing from you, that with the power of one, is we can, professionals, clinicians, whoever, for each other, actually, we can all do this for each other, is be that person who can hear, hey, of course you're struggling with that. Look at what's happened to you. That makes sense that you're struggling with that. But how can I help you move in the way that you want to move? So that's sort of my intention, to do what I think you're saying. So
cool. Just going to the other question about the justice system. I think there does need to be a reshape of how it is adequately acknowledged. I do think that, you know, like for me personally, I tried to report to the police. And when I tried to report to the police officer came out and turned around to me and said, right, okay, you've made a report. I'm here to take a statement from you. Are you going to report that you've experienced sexual abuse? And I said to him, why are you asking me that? And he said, because men don't get the same outcome that women get in court. Instantly, that made me just shrivel up like a slug on salt and not want to say anything. So I told them about the physical side of the abuse as opposed to the sexual, because I got to a point where I was ready to talk and I was ready to say something. And instantly, as soon as that man said that, it took me to a place where actually I'd let all that vulnerability out, and he scared me back into a place of being incredibly vulnerable. So yeah, it wasn't nice, but you live and learn. You know, the system, the thing is, change isn't coming, it's already here. If it wasn't here, we wouldn't be on this call with you guys. So the fact that it is changing and kind of we're assisting with the change of that landscape and how that looks and how people are treated and how professionals view people that have gone through adverse childhood experiences is a good thing. And it's, you know, again, it's something that needs to change, and it's about time that these changes were taking place.
Can I just comment just quickly on on the
Yeah, man.
on the criminal justice side of things. So my experience, like similar to Mike. So I reported to the police. There was an investigation, and what happened was the investigation went on for 18 months. 10 other lads come forward saying the same story as me, the same person who'd done what they'd done to them. And the CPS come back. So I was waiting for this final day, waiting for the letter. My experience in the police station when reporting was terrible. I felt like a piece of shit off someone's shoe when I walked out. Because the copper wasn't trauma informed who interviewed me. And then finally, when done the whole investigation and stuff, the CPS come back and they said, because you was a delinquent when you was a child, you're not a credible witness. And they watched it and they dropped the case, threw my case out, and the dog has just ate my butty. They watched it, they threw the case out because I wasn't a credible witness. So they say, and it was like, how can you not see that there's a reason for why I was behaving when I was behaving, and you're judging me as a child? Because it was on about like sort of a primary school age, and it was talking about how many different primary schools I've been to and stuff like that, and my behaviour when I was in school. It's like this is the Crown Prosecution Service who can't see that people that an entry wound to a lot of people's behaviour is flipping trauma. You know what I mean? So that was a bad experience, but you know, not all reporting to the police is a bad experience. Is a bad experience for everyone. You know, and I don't want to discourage people not to report to police. Like Wayne is one of the very few people who know who's had a background same as me and Mike, who has actually got a conviction. But I tell you what, he had to fight like hell to get that conviction, and flipping had to go through 2 trials, and it nearly got flipping thrown out. So you know, Wayne's the resident flipping expert on the criminal justice. You've lived and breathed it, didn't you, Wayne, for flipping years? Do you want to come in? Do you want to say anything, Wayne? Can't hear you. No.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think thank you so much for these very fascinating discussions. But I'm very sorry that we have to wrap up this session because it's already it's already 4:30. But really appreciate Hayley, Danny, and Mike your speech today, and very appreciate all the participants. And we had a great discussion. Our next seminar will be on 20th October, and we'll release information very soon. And thank you very much for being here today. Look forward to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks for having us. Apologies for the language. Thanks for
No
having
worries.
us. Yeah. Take care. See you soon. Bye.
Take care. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.